So I'm Jesse Knight again. I've been in FRC for forever as the drive coach of 1885. And as a result, I typically lead the robot strategy for the team. And this is going to take you through kind of our journey of our kind of rethinking of strategy in 2017. And how we've been pretty successful since then. So the things that you should be thinking about right now as a team in the preseason, still preseason for another 4 weeks, are kind of what your goals for the team are, what you need to define what success actually looks like for your team. And a lot of teams say, oh, we want to win an event. Well, to win an event, you typically need to make it into eliminations. You either need to be an alliance captain or you need to be very good at doing something. And as a prerequisite to all of that, you actually need to make sure kids join your team. You probably will need some mentors to help you learn how to use tools and things like that. You will need sponsors. You'll need recurring sponsors because it's much easier to have a sponsor return and continue to help you the next year than it is to find a brand new sponsor. You want to make sure that your school actually supports you in some way to make sure you have the space to build your robot. So in the preseason, you need to make sure that you have all of these things kind of outlined, at least at an abstract level, to make sure that your season is a success. So we won our first event in 2017. So then we just said, okay, now we want to be an alliance captain and win an event. Or we want to continue to, I think our next goal is actually to win a division at Worlds because we've made it into a division at Worlds a couple of times. So now we want to win that division to make it to Einstein. On kickoff day, I know it's going to be different for 2021. You actually know what the game is right now. And I know that the challenges for 2021 look very different than they did for 2020. But in a normal game, in a normal year, if we ever get back to normal, on kickoff, they'll release a video, an animation that shows what the game will conceptually look like, give you an idea what the points are, and help you kind of formulate strategies from there. But as a team, if you've defined success as we want to make it to world championships in this case, well, to get to world championships, you need to be in the top like 20 in the Chesapeake district. So you need district points. And to get district points, you can get them by being an alliance captain at any event. You can either win the event or make it pretty deep into the bracket in eliminations at the event. Or you can get awards for all of those. You know, a little bit from all of those. To get awards, you can either get them through a great business strategy. You can win chairmans by having a great business and outreach strategy. Or for some of the technical awards, you actually do need to build a robot that demonstrates so that the capabilities that you want to show the judges. So regardless of what you choose, the most precious resource you actually have during the build season is time itself. Supposing you have sponsorship and all that stuff. So time is everything. And finally, what they did with 2020 was they actually admitted that the build season isn't 45 days like it used to be. The build season is 4 months if you want to make it to Worlds. You don't necessarily stop building in February. You need to keep going and adapt to how teams are actually playing the game if you want to have success at Worlds. When we start brainstorming something at iLight, we start with the idea of this thing called point powers. Point powers is a term that was coined by Den Black, I believe, in 2011. He kind of came up with it, and it represents the points for time spent. It is the highest. Think of it as like velocity of points. It's the highest velocity you can possibly have in a game. Now, the length of time you measure the number of points you can get is also just as important, and that's what we've come to learn. So, for example, in 2017. You could do gears that year, or you could shoot the little balls into the steam hopper. And if you realize that you know, if you realize that it was very valuable to shoot the balls into the steam hopper during autonomous, you actually got an incredible amount of points in just 15 seconds. So as far as that goes as well, so if you try to extend that into your build season, when you're building a robot, you're building it so it will score points. And so you want to make sure that the time that you spend building something to score points is worth it for the points that you're going to earn in the season. Give you an example of that. In 2015, a lot of teams thought, oh, we should just stack the totes. And that was iLight's thought. We should just stack the totes and worry about the cans later. Well, it turns out the major point power of that game was not the totes. It was the can on top of a stack of totes. And so what we actually did at Worlds that year was we pivoted. We ignored the totes completely. And all we did was manipulate the cans. And we found a level of success. I won't say we were successful. We figured out what worked for us, and we were actually pretty satisfied with that. At this point in the season, you're trying to ignore how hard something is. So you don't really care that the can in 2015 is 6 feet in the air and your robot might have to lift a 20-pound can up really high. Don't worry about that yet. Your build team might solve that for you. Just worry that it's the most valuable thing to do, and that's what you want to do. Excuse me. So the way I like to do this presentation is with an animation. And because we're remote this year, I don't know if the sound is going to play through Zoom. So if you could let me know, Don, if you actually hear something. And if not, I'll just describe how this game plays out using the slides I have here.
Will do.
Can you guys hear that at all?
No, yes, I can.
That's weird. I can't even hear either. Okay. So maybe let me try and give you a live commentary, which if you participated in Virtual IROC, this is kind of what we did here. So in the match, robots could, they could shoot the balls into the hopper. So as you can see here, they could do this in autonomous. There was a high goal here in the upper right and a low goal that you saw a Lobot doing. They could put gears on, oh man, this thing goes so fast. So you see in the bottom, there's a robot putting little balls into the low hopper. You could put gears on these little pegs. The pegs had little springs. And you actually see the gear is elevated there. A human player is actually picking the gear up. That was a very cool concept where there's a human player in the middle of the field. It's probably one of the coolest concepts I've ever seen first put out. And at the end, robots had to climb a rope. Here's the field layout overall. On the edge of the field, you actually see these little structures, these little metal and polycarbonate structures. That's where the balls started the match. The games are always played 3 versus 3, so 3 red robots, 3 blue robots. The partners you have in one match during qualifications might actually be your opponents in a different match, and so that's what kind of makes first qualifications kind of interesting. So here, the balls start on the edge of the field. The gears actually start on the side of the field, and there's a tote of balls that starts behind the glass as well for a human player to put in. In autonomous, robots cannot be controlled via humans. They get some points for crossing a line. They get points for putting gears onto the pegs and human players putting it onto the steamship, but they also get points for the balls going into the steam boiler as well. So here you just see kind of how first thought the game might play out. And, gears go into the pegs, human player, you can kind of see them. When the balls go into the boiler, they actually come out for the human player to recycle them back onto the field. That is an option for them to do. They don't have to do that. In the upper right, you actually see how many balls it takes to get 1 point in the game for the high goal and 1 point for the game in the low goal. I actually thought this was a mistake on first part where they undervalued the goal itself. The audience loves to see things like flying in the air, and it was just so undervalued that year because the low goal itself, it's very difficult to get a single point in the low goal. So nobody really went for the low goal, and very few teams could hit the high goal just because of the geometry of the goal itself. But what was interesting is if you got enough balls into that goal, you got a bonus for it. And this is one of the few years where there was a bonus. So if you hit 40 points, I believe, in qualifications, you got a ranking point, which helped you seed higher. In eliminations, you actually got 20 points towards the match if you hit 40 points worth into the boiler. Similarly, the gears, as you put more gears onto the airship in the middle, the gears started ranking up in points as well. So it was 40 points for a single rotor. You see the human player here rotating the rotor. And it actually took more gears to get the third rotor than it did to get the first rotor. And if you got all four rotors in a match, you got an incredibly high bonus of 100 points in eliminations. Now, if you're thinking about point powers, that 100 points is kind of insane. It's basically you spent 2 minutes and now your actual amount of points is about to go up by 50% just because you hit some threshold. And finally, towards the end of the match, robots could climb. Now, this is where it was actually critical to follow what robots were doing. And first did not actually state you had to use their ropes. You could actually make your own rope. And so if you thought about what a rope is, it might actually be a little tiny piece of string that is stupidly strong, such as sail rope. And, you could hook that rope up yourself and, instead of trying to climb this big, thick thing, you now have this little thing you can just wind up on a winch. And that's actually what most teams did. So with that in mind, we'll go back to the presentation. And here we can see a very quick breakdown of the scoring for that game. You actually saw in autonomous, here's all the points that you could get. You got an extra bonus, 20 points for making a rotor spin in autonomous. So you could get, a single rotor was worth 60 points in autonomous. In teleop, the efficiency of the fuel was actually not that great. It actually took 3 fuel into the high goal to get 1 point, whereas in autonomous, it took only 1 fuel into the high goal to get 1 point. And finally, for the climbing, it was 50 points. So if you got three robots that could climb in a single match, that was basically 30 to 40% of the points in a match. In any year where that's the case, where the end game is worth that much, you better do it. If you don't do it, you won't make eliminations. So 2020, kind of up in the air with how the point structure worked out. We didn't really know if climbing would be worth that much. And it was worth a decent amount, especially at early events. It would win a couple of events. But if you had a strong autonomous, it really didn't matter if you climbed. And also the ranking points should not be underestimated if you're trying to be an alliance captain. If that's one of your team goals, make sure you're hitting your ranking points. So what we also did was we did the math on the gears themselves. 12 gears was 260 points, whereas 40 balls in autonomous into the high goal was worth 60 points. So to us, we knew that we could build a gear mechanism and we could design an entire robot around a gear mechanism for that 260 points per match, where with one set of complexity, and it would have been like 3 or 4 times more complex to build a robot that could shoot, 40 balls in 15 seconds for just like 60 points. It just didn't make sense to us. Now, at the same time, we also made the trade-off of, we knew we would not seed high at Worlds because we weren't doing the fuel. So if we were in a division where there were 4 or 5 robots that could do the fuel and autonomous, then we just would not we would not be an alliance captain. And for us at the time, we were just trying to win a local event. That was a good enough trade-off. So once you have the point structure of a game, now you want to understand how to estimate the time. Now, one of my favorite things to do is take a set of rookie students who have never seen an FRC game. The only thing they've seen is the animation. And all we do is we act out the different ways to score points using humans. And usually I will act as some kind of critical piece to make sure students are acting like robots. So for example, in 2018, I was kind of the scale, and I would tip one way if I had more pins in one hand, or tip the other way. And so students could actually see, you know, the amount of time it takes to go from one place to another, or if there was traffic and they kept running into each other, they could actually see that as well, and that would increase the amount of time. We actually understood very quickly in 2017 that shooting a wiffle ball into a vertical goal, we'll call it, where the hole is horizontal, which means the ball has to come down vertically. That was way more difficult than we thought it would be, just looking at the animation. We also started to understand that acquiring a gear with the balls on the floor would be a major thing that the build team would have to design for, which meant that an effective gear score needed to account for that. If they didn't, they weren't really that effective, trying to be the best in the world. We also estimated in 2020, we broke everything down into like seconds, how long it would take to get to a single point on the field, how long it would take to pick up a game piece from a single point on the field, how long it would take to get to a scoring position, and then how long it would take to move the balls through the robot and score. And we probably took 2 or 3 days to map all of this out with, some simulation, but also with humans acting it out. And ultimately we decided that, autonomous was going to be king for us in 2020. And so by district championships, we wanted to have a lot of different autonomous options that hit multiple balls into the high goal. In 2017, 2016, a lot of teams are like, oh, we can climb in under a second, but it took them 10 seconds to acquire the rope. And that's very critical. If it takes forever for you to go climb, to actually acquire the climb and then do the climb, that's 10 seconds you're not scoring elsewhere on the field. And so that matters. And finally, where an action occurs can really matter, because you might be under defense when you have to score in 2019, for example. The last point about examining the rules around point powers is very critical, because in a game like 2010, the tournament rules, how you ranked in a tournament, was affected by something like your opponent's score, which does not make sense to us these days. But in that game, that's just how the tournament played. So make sure you read those rules. Once you have the point powers, you need to actually start to, using human interaction, or using, there's an Autodesk synthesis simulator, you can actually get a feel for how the field will drive. Start to understand what it will be like to go blind around field elements. Start to understand where the referees will probably stand and what they won't be able to see that well. So like in 2016, referees in the early season, they missed a lot of the crossings in that game, because you crossed a barrier and you got points for that, but it was manually scored by a referee. And so their depth perception it was difficult for them to watch that scoring, and also defense potentially. So they might miss it just because there was a depth perception issue. And as you start to draw these things out, now you're going to start to care about how hard something is. So for example, if you're just trying to if you said the highest point power in this game is to go for the top of the pyramid, but your rookie team, you have maybe one build resource who isn't a mechanical engineer and doesn't really understand everything in play, maybe going for that top rung, it's on your list of things that are the best in the world might do, but maybe you start with a slightly lower point power that will still get you a lot of points for the time spent, but is within your means to actually do. And in 2016, it was our worst case. We did not understand that. We said we were going to do all of the things, and we're try and do all of them well, and yet we did none of them well, because we tried to do the most complicated things with the robot overall. And finally, in 2016, that bar was listed as 16 inches high. But if you wanted to hit that at speed, you would actually pop up on a little bump and your robot would hit the bar if you weren't 14 inches or lower. If you were actually 16 inches, you couldn't really fit through it. So in an autonomous, one of the things that has evolved with autonomous, and I expect it to continue to evolve, is that the raw value of autonomous doesn't necessarily matter so much as what it sets up for teleop. So for example, in 2014, the 3 different robots could start with a gigantic ball. And if one of them missed their autonomous shot, you could not start scoring any other points in the game until that ball was scored. It was crazy. You basically asked your partners to not put a ball in their robot if they missed every single autonomous shot. Now, whether or not that's ethical or whether or not you should do that, in eliminations, the alliance captain will make that call. But typically what iLight does is in qualifications, if you want to try your shot and you miss it, okay, we got your back. We'll try and go clean it up for you. In 2017, if iLight would drop maybe a third of the gears at the airship in our first event in autonomous, and that basically slowed down everything else in the match because we then had a gear in the way as we tried to put more gears on the airship. Also in autonomous, every single robot should be able to move forward for 4 seconds. Usually you cross some line and you get some points. And a lot of teams out there will actually help you write the code to do that if you don't know how to do that yourself. And then in autonomous, there are some things that are very risky to do, such as, if you wanted to go for the hopper to get the balls like you saw in the animation, that was much riskier to do because of, you had to align with it correctly for the balls to fall into your robot just exactly right. And then your scoring mechanism had to align just perfectly with the goal to be able to score all of those balls. Same thing with if you started in the middle peg on the airship, you could just drive forward and place a gear on there, no problem. But if you wanted to start on the sides and place a gear on the side pegs, you actually had to drive forward and turn at the exact right point. And if you didn't do that, then you'd be out of alignment and you would miss the peg. So with that in mind, I say that micro-strategies often have a much larger impact than you would think. So for example, in 2016, a lot of teams made the seemingly small decision that, yeah, we'll go under that bar. If we don't do it and there's nobody on our alliance who can go under that bar, then we won't be able to get the ranking point or the bonus points for the overall game objective. But the problem is everybody had that kind of mindset. And what that then meant is everybody had to package all of their robot under 14 inches if they wanted to go into that bar. And that's the kind of example where if you had just said, okay, in the matches where we don't have a partner that can do that, then oh well. We will instead do all of the other barrier objects in 2016 and be fine with that. Because ultimately, at least for iLight and a bunch of other teams, we sacrificed a lot of practice time to be able to go under that bar because we spent so much time designing and packaging and rebuilding and things like that just to stay under that bar. Another thing about micro strategies, like for a game like 2013, which you won't get to see just because of time, but is where to acquire the game piece. Usually there's a static place on the field where it's easy to acquire the game piece, like in 2017 from the slots. Whereas if you're going to pick up from the floor, you actually might have to design your entire robot around that. And I see that we're at time. So with that, I think I'll only point you to this YouTube video called Effective First Strategies by the Simbots. Karthik on the Simbots put that out a couple of years ago. And it's been very successful since then.